Hi everybody. So this review is on the black sci-fi Afrofuturistic movie called The Black Box, which was produced by Amazon in 2020. And I actually originally have been meaning for some time to watch it, but 2020, which is when the movie came out, honestly was just such an exhausting year with COVID and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the things that can be things. Um, well, I just couldn't. I don't know that I could handle. I couldn't handle some of the things. So anyway, so now I'm doing a review for it. So shout out to KT Creator who actually asked me to do more stuff on Afrofuturism, which is what I love. And I know a lot of people don't know a lot about it, and it's a genre and a growing genre. Um, Dealing with black people in science fiction and how we're recreating our narratives to deal with things historically and how we may see ourselves in the future, broadly speaking. All right. But side note, am I the only one that saw the woman who just seems to have lost it? I don't know the whole story, but Wendell Pierce, who is on Broadway in New York for Death of a Salesman, um, his first black man to play that part, and it was pretty disruptive. Although I'm not sure what she did. Um, I only saw a clip, but shouts out to him for trying to handle that and trying to handle it by what I saw as him not letting the police get to this black woman, knowing how those kind of situations can escalate when we're dealing with black people and police. So anyway, more on that. Let's hope we find out some more on that. But Black Box. All right. So I was like, okay, well, let me review this. I remember being interested. So we have a few characters. We have Nolan Wright, who's a father, who's a widower. He's dealt with brain trauma and he's a car accident survivor. Okay. Ava, his daughter, is actually very smart, clearly on top of her father and very protective of him. The mother has passed in the same car accident. So it's just her and her father. And she has to take on adult responsibilities like making dinner and prepping her father for job interviews. Kind of suspicious of this at first, but I'll explain. Dr. Lillian Brooks, who's played by Felicia Rashad. Um, and she does a good job with the part. My opinions on Felicia Rashad, for now. And then Rachel will be a reoccurring conversation because Rachel is his wife that dies in a car accident, Nolan. All right. So the black box, so you know what it is. It's a headset where the doctor, who in this case is Dr. Brooks, played by Felicia Rashad, puts you under hypnosis to open up your subconscious. And the EEG reads the brain waves and sends them to the processor inside the black box. So the processor extracts those memories and converts them to an immersive virtual experience like a dream, or you're basically walking in your own shoes to kind of deal with the memories that you have. And it's really the trauma responses of the brain, in terms of things you can't remember. Dr. Brooks will explain that that's your brain's way of protecting you from the bad memories. All right, so in the first section with the black box, because Nolan can't really remember much and he's run out of traditional doctors to go to, and his best friend Gary, who's also a doctor, suggests that he goes to Dr. Brooks because she's kind of on the cutting edge of like this dream neuroscience research. So he goes to her, and in his first session with the black box, this technology that she's created, he gets back into his memory of his wedding. He can see that his wife is there and their guests, but all the faces are blurred. He can't see any of them, including the minister, no matter how close or how far somebody is. So when he comes out of that first session, Dr. Brooks tells him the fact that he's even seen things this first time around with the hypnosis is wonderful, and he's making good progress. And she explains to him that, hey, it may be weird to hear after seeing so many doctors and not feeling like there's any progress made. But the fact that you can see things the first try is good. It means your subconscious is opening up, and we can figure out the brain trauma from the car accident. She explains the reason why the faces are blurred, more than likely, is because his brain is trying to protect him from previous traumas he experienced. All right, and faces are triggers. So I like this, and and as I was going through, I was kind of making notes of things I liked or was curious about. So I like this because it was discussing trauma in a very scientific way in a black casted movie. Okay, it was a black cast and not a forced black cast with these kind of stereotypical black characters, but characters who had development, characters who had history, characters who had feelings, and not just what people think black is. And I don't mean that like in a self-hating way where somebody's like, well, I wanted to show black people amongst white people to prove a point. Like it's not that's not what I mean. What I mean is it allows the diversity of blackness. That's what I mean. So there's a black female doctor who's doing edgy scientific work to help brain trauma victims, Felicia Rashad. There's a black man who's a single father because him and his wife were involved in a car accident. And he's not a single father because he has some dysfunctional relationship with his wife. They can't raise his kids. Kind of the way we've seen like in movies like years ago, like Daddy's Girls, produced by Tyler Perry, where it's like, yeah, for once you see the black father as the hero and he's taking care of his daughters, but he can only be that in complete contrast to a dysfunctional, abusive black mother. You see what I mean? Um, and I'm sure there's plenty of things we can interrogate about the fact the mother doesn't exist in this regard, but nevertheless, I appreciate the difference when I was talking about diversity of black experience. Um, he allows his child to have emotions, and that was one of the things that really stood out to me, because one of the things um, that Bell Hooks, spoke about in her work. Bell Hooks is a pioneering black feminist, and yes, emphasis on black feminists, because she was one of those people that noted how white women have historically excluded black women from their movements, even when they borrowed from their ideas and their philosophies. And she really pioneers this stuff in the 1980s. Ain't I a Woman is a classic. I suggest you pick it up for anybody who wants to learn more. But anyway, she always talks about how black children have historically been forced to become mini adults, right? And when people are mean or abusive to them, it's a joke or it's funny. And, it's rooted in slavery. You went from being a baby to on the labor camp. Okay, that was it. So, and then black people kind of treating their kids like mini adults, that kind of thing. So, even though she really has to be her own caretaker, it's because her father's incapable of remembering to do things because his brain has had trauma, like pick her up from school. And I like the fact that the little black girl is clearly smart and capable, and she makes a habit of defending her father to her white teacher. Like when he doesn't pick her up or remember to pick her up. Um, and when she does come home, the white teacher says to him, look, next time we're going to have to call, child protection services or whatever. And he apologizes. But Ava, his daughter, said, look, he's just, she defended him to the white teacher. So she's not telling her business. But then she's still, sad and frustrated about her father. And so when she comes home, um, she says something like, I know I'm a burden to you. And starts crying. And instead of, becoming verbally abusive. Well, why are you crying? Why are you saying it? That's not true. Da-da-da. He allows her to have feelings and emotions. He knows that she's having to do a lot. And it's not because he wants her to be this adult child that I think is often depicted with black kids, particularly black girls, in literature and movies. Like they're these adult children who have attitudes and, as if kids can't have regular emotions, but she's still like a child. She gets to be a child. And this has been the case in real life terms in unfortunate expectations of black children in black families and outside of it, like in school and things like that. So as a father, he takes responsibility for his shortcomings to his child, not in conversations about his child with other adults, but to his child, and tries to comfort his little girl when she has emotions and says, look, I'm sick. I'm the issue. None of this is your fault. And so I think that kind of non dysfunctional, but you know, inevitable things that just sometimes happen in life and are a challenge, shows itself in this movie. I also like the fact that he had a black male doctor friend whose name is Gary. And we all know that less than 5% of the doctors in this country are African American. So I think depicting these things are important and also shouts out to the black doctors doing their thing. who's his friend. But Gary also is supporting him throughout this process. And he brings, after hearing about how, look, he forgot to pick up his child. Ava has to make dinner. And, she made a comment to her father, like, well, if I don't cook it, nobody else will. So Gary the next day comes over and he brings Ava and Nolan Chinese food after that incident. Uh, after Ava having to cook for herself. And so to me, this showed that clearly he had a discussion with his friend about how his child has to do a lot of things that honestly he doesn't have the ability to do right now. And Gary, as his black male friend, comes to mitigate the problem, not by cooking. He didn't come over and try to be a chef, but by being supportive and making sure they both eat. All right. Now, he doesn't say that in the movie, but he doesn't have to. It's with his actions, and I like that. And his actions that are clearly followed. Sometimes people say, well, this was the larger picture, and then we don't see it in the movie, and we're like, well, what picture? And I like that. I like that. So even when Ava comes downstairs to join them, because he brings them Chinese food, there's this scene where she's excited to see her Uncle Gary. They have a little moment on the couch, and she looks down. There's this bright purple iPad. And there is this little background picture of her father and her mother together. And she turns it over, she slams it, and, turns her head away and puts her head down. And Gary looks to Nolan like, gives him a head nod, like, say something, like, comfort your child. And Nolan being unable to do a lot of things emotionally, psychologically, Gary immediately stepped in and puts his arm around Ava and says, it's okay to miss your mother. It's okay to feel the way you're feeling. You don't have to do that. You don't have to turn it over. And I think having a movie where black men are showing tenderness to their black daughters and not being in competition or toxic competition to show black men are good. And in order to do that, we have to show black women are evil or vice versa. And instead, the black mother is loved and in high regard, but has unfortunately died too soon. I think it's a good thing. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't forced in this way. Now, by the time we get to the end of the movie, I don't know, people have different opinions, whatever. And black men stepping up to support a young black girl is good. Meanwhile, Dr. Brooks, all right, who has the black box, is helping Nolan deal with his brain trauma without her being some evil, opposing black female dynamic. At least this is what I'm getting as I make notes. And one doesn't have to look bad for the other to look good, but that has typically been the case. And we've seen that play out in real society. We have. But as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to Afrofuturism, when it comes to movies, white people don't depict themselves how they lived all the time. They get to always have these balancing characters. Don't get me started on Kindred, where they always get to at least have a good set of people that are white. And then it's just kind of, they're just a villain in a different way. Whereas black movies don't even often give that. It's just constant. I won't say constant because there are plenty of good black movies, but those ones that seem to get more attention than everybody else with that pathology, whatever. So, anyway, he goes to see Dr. Brooks again. And blurred faces are also a sign of brain damage, like I said, according to Dr. Brooks on the second visit. So she gave him this mantra because she knows she's about to open up his subconscious again with this kind of VR looking black box. And has to deal with painful memories. And so, to deal with painful memories. And she tells him, I run my mind, it does not run me. I run my mind, it does not run me. And she makes Nolan repeat it for when he goes to the black box and has to deal with these painful memories or scary developments in his subconscious, right? So he can work through the memory longer. So there is this bent over, like, body crackling distortion of what looks like Nolan in a suit, but he doesn't have a face either. And anytime Nolan is happy in his subconscious, this crackling body distortion kind of reminds you of something of Beetlejuice. But you could tell like it's Nolan, but it doesn't have a face either. Pops out and like kind of disrupts it. So on his third trip to Dr. Brooks, Dr. Brooks emphasizes that he needs to focus and to try to see faces despite any distractions of other things like the body crackling distortion, or distortions of the memory. And at one point, this crawling, crackling body distortion smacks him really hard, like boom, to the point where his memory moves him from being at his wedding to inside his daughter Ava's bedroom. I don't know why that happened, but okay. So once again, on the third round, He sees faces, especially Rachel's, his wife who passed, right? And at some point he says to himself, what we thought was Rachel, and I remember looking at her face and I said, that doesn't look like the woman that was in the other pictures in his house, but okay, but they kind of look like enough for me to say maybe I forgot. Um, and Nolan says to himself, these aren't Nolan's memories, these are mine, which doesn't make sense because Nolan is saying it. Well, it's going to get crazy. All right, so a different actor appears as Nolan is looking through the window at his reflection, right? Like, whose memories are this? And it's a man we have not seen before. All right, and then this man also, he starts to say mom when he's looking at Dr. Brooks in her general direction because the black box is still in his eyes. And Dr. Brooks, being Phylicia Rashad, walks over to him and says, Thomas, you remember. Then she walks over and grabs his arm affectionately. Then we realize that Nolan has awakened out of his black box memory. So she takes it off. And he begins calling her mom and asking her, what did she do? She tells him that when he fell down the stairs, he was already too far gone and they couldn't save him after, the incident. So his mother, who is somebody who has been researching brain trauma, downloaded his memory and brain data. All right. And saved it, even though they couldn't save his physical life. Right. So then they find that patient Nolan, who was a different patient who also experienced brain trauma through a car accident, was semi-dead, right, in terms of the brain, but his body was okay. So she decides to bring her son Thomas back by basically doing like where her son Thomas's brain data that she downloaded, right? So he could come back in somebody else's body. And then what she was going to do was what she's doing is trying to convince him that he's really her son Thomas so she can have a reincarnation of him. Child is deep. Okay. So, he was like, I don't have amnesia. So what do you expect me to do? Just go out and pretend to be somebody else? Phylicia Rashad gets snippy. But anyway, so the woman whose apartment he entered into when he was trying to go back through his memories was actually Thomas's real life wife. That's Phylicia Rashad's son, Dr. Brooks' son. His wife, whose name is Miranda. And they had a daughter named Ashley. And she shows him the pictures of his family in the doctor's office as he's asking her about his amnesia. So, what he thought was amnesia. She says, well, look, you have a second chance to be a husband and the father she knows he can be and a kind of doctor he can be. And he goes, well, what are you showing me this woman named Miranda and Ashley for? Where's my daughter Ava? And she says, that's not your real daughter. His memory has been gone for 2 years at this point. And she was waiting for his brain to adjust to the new body, which is Nolan's body from the car accident, right? But it's still Thomas's brain, right? I know it's weird and crazy, but I'm kind of here for it. All right. So then he goes to pick Ava up from school. And he is so thrown off by this information. I mean, I guess like the rest of us who are watching it. He goes to pick Ava up from school. She tries to begin the handshake with him that she's been doing to jog his memory. And he just looks at her and shakes his head like in a no. And I was like, that's cold-blooded. But she just kind of accepts it. And he passes by the gate of the school and he stares down this white teacher. The one that said she was going to call Child Protection Services if he wasn't there to pick up his daughter. And she's been treating him suspiciously since the beginning of the movie. But he also didn't stare her down before. So there's clearly been a shift. And whoever Thomas is not who Nolan is. Obviously, his brain data is there. So they get in the car. And Nolan, who's physically Nolan, who might be mentally Thomas at this point, he was supposed to put Ava's seatbelt on. And he refuses and says, no, we have to talk about something, but it's best if we get home. And that he's going to drop her off. And then he says, I'm going to drop you off at Uncle Gary's for a few days because things aren't safe with him. Because he has no idea what to do with this new information. So Dr. Brooks took him into her lab. Gary finds, because he works at the hospital, because he's a doctor. And Dr. Brooks he finds out Dr. Brooks took Nolan into her lab when he was in a coma. And Gary said that and told him that when he dropped Ava off and said, that doesn't seem strange to you? And he just goes, no, because he's still, Dr. Brooks has the control over him, and Dr. Brooks, technically, if this is Thomas's brain data, is his mother. Why wouldn't he side with her? So he goes to visit Miranda, who Dr. Brooks has explained to him was his wife before the staircase accident, back at apartment A203. Don't ask me why I wrote that down, but for some reason I was just like, okay. She opens the door because she remembers him from the first time he visited, because he was trying to still see what was his memory and not his memory. Anyway, she opens the door and says, look, I don't know who you are, but if you come back here, I'm going to have to call the police on you. And all I could think was, Miranda, we haven't known you that long in this 2-hour movie, but you're bad for opening the door without asking who it is first, and letting your daughter open the door without asking who it is first, and not getting in trouble for that. Anyway, he calls her by her name, Miranda. She asks, do you know my, like, what? How do you know my name? And he says that he went to undergrad with her husband, right? Now, how does he know what to say and think? Because he has Thomas's brain. Like, it's insane. So he says, I went to undergrad with your husband. We were both bio majors. Says, I never met you, but he says that he had one genetics class with him, and they took, just ended up taking 2 different paths, because Nolan is a photographer. Okay, that's what he decides to do with his life. So he tells her that he knew about her because he used to always talk about how lucky he was to have her, and how patient she was, and how he also knew how difficult it was for him to get into a decent medical school, right? So we're starting to get kind of an idea like, yeah, Thomas may have been more of a disappointment, because he wasn't imitating what his family wanted, particularly Dr. Brooks. So she chokes up a bit at him bringing up this information. Then she still asks him, well, why are you here, though? And he just says he moved to the neighborhood, wanted to introduce himself. I was thinking to myself, well, then consider yourself introduced. I would have shut that fucking door. But anyway, he asked her to let him in for just 1 minute. Girl, why? Okay. But all right, maybe in the Avro future, we can, trust people enough to let them in our house. But okay. So he asks if she remembers her late husband's mother, Dr. Brooks. And she kind of, makes a face and says, yes, I remember his mother. But to be honest, we don't talk much. So basically, if that's what you're looking for, you can leave. She didn't say that, but I'm just saying. All right. And she asked, well, are you asking me that did something happen to her? And he says no. He says, do you remember that dream project about brain waves to restore memory she was always working on? And Miranda's like, yes, that digital voodoo nonsense. And he kind of sits up on the couch and he goes, it wasn't nonsense. It worked. He then tells her his name is Thomas, like her husband. She then proceeds to kick him out. Yes, Miranda. Yes, opening your door was a mistake, but I'm glad you realized he needs to leave. So he starts telling her about the apartment wallpaper, what she wore on their first date, how she dealt with her nervousness. So she goes, who are you? And he basically explains they did a face transplant with along with the digital memory. He tells her he thought this could be a chance for them to rewrite us. Let's rewrite us, our history, so on and so forth. He says, I'm not going to hurt you anymore. Mind you, he had been asking his friend Gary, was I ever abusive to Rachel? Did I hurt? He was like, what are you talking about? He said, no, if anything like that ever happened, she would have told me. Y'all were inseparable. It's kind of disgusting. I was thinking to myself, okay, abuse can happen right in somebody's nose and they will still not tell you. But nevertheless, I get your point. Well, the thing was, Thomas had been actually very abusive to Miranda. So he looks around, he realizes in this apartment, he goes, all the pictures of him, Miranda, and Ashley, their child, is gone. His chair is gone. His bookshelf is gone. I was thinking to myself, why would you expect them to keep your chair and bookshelf around after you passed, Thomas? And you were abusive. Okay. Anyway, he says, I know I made some mistakes, but you've erased me. No. Who erased you was your mom, Dr. Brooks. But anyway, he then starts yelling at her, and she goes, look, I can't do this right now. And he gets in her face aggressively and asks, well, when is a good day for you, right? So Thomas is coming out, but he's still in Nolan's body, right? He charges instead back into the apartment, and she tries to grab him, and he says, don't you ever touch me again. Okay, now mind you, it was okay for him to leave bruises on her during their marriage, right? Which they show flashbacks to. He slams her against the wall and says, she's my daughter too. He opens the door of the little girl's bedroom, who has apparently heard nothing, because she has her headphones on. and he smiles tenderly. And the next thing you know, Miranda has popped his ass with some huge item, and he wakes up outside on the sidewalk with Ava at Uncle Gary's, feeling the back of his head, and he's bleeding, and nobody knows what happened. They just know mentally he was somewhere else, and they're confused. And Gary's like, okay, wait, we need to get you together. And then he's like bleeding and hopping in the car, and he goes to see Dr. Brooks, his mother. And he says, Mom, what happened to me? And he starts getting huffy, and she tells him, calm down. I'm thinking, and that kind of Claire Huxtable voice. I hate to even bring up this show because once upon a time I loved it, and now I can't even look at it because Bill Cosby's raped his ass. And if you don't agree, sorry, I'm not going to sit up here and act like somebody who has been accused of rape from the 70s, like who had a chance to make things right and kept doing this into the 2000s. Anyway, so it's hard. I don't watch that, but like in that Claire Huxtable way. Anyway, so he then starts yelling at her. No. I did that. Okay. So she's thinking that she asked about Miranda and Ashley, right? She's acting like nothing ever happened. Like his memory should be downloaded. And he said, they kicked me out already. And they made their decision. They don't want me in their life, right? So Thomas is like angry. And he said, I didn't even do anything. And I was like, no, you neglected to tell her how you shoved Miranda up against the wall, kind of like you did in those previous days. He said he didn't do anything. He didn't tell her that. And she gives him a kind of, once again, that Claire Huxtable, and backs him into a corner and grabs his face and taps on his temples and explains to him that everything starts in his mind. Or she says, do you want to be like your father, forgotten and erased? Right? We don't get much about his father. But I imagine because he's a man who is abusive to his wife and quickly went right back into that mode, his father probably, more than likely, was abusive to his mother, and that's where the learned behavior comes from. And his behavior and abuse went unchecked by his parents. Happens way too often. And the women walk around with the shame instead of the men who carry that behavior out. That's why I don't ever think that shit is funny. Anyway, so the crawling, crackling thing that I was telling you about that comes out in Nolan's subconscious turns out really to be Nolan inside of Thomas's subconscious because they downloaded his brainwaves. I know y'all like, this is crazy, but y'all should go watch it. Right? So he was about to kill Nolan, and he hears Ava, and he says, wait, Nolan is still alive. His mother said, I'm about to count you down. Stop and focus. Stop and focus. Ava and Uncle Gary had actually come down to the doctor's office looking for Nolan. And Dr. Brooks is still trying to keep this experiment going to bring her son back. And she leans over and whispers to him and says, I'm about to count you down. Stop and focus so we can get the brain waves. And then she leans over and says, you were so ungrateful for all I've done for you. All right. Now, then we get the full memory of him trying to hurt his wife, Miranda, and the little girl, Ashley. And the little girl, of course, being a little girl, seeing him hit her mother, like out in the hallway, she says, stop, Daddy, stop. And he kicks her into a wall, the little girl. And the wife, who apparently doesn't have the strength for herself, which is not an uncommon story, the strength for herself, does have it to protect her child. And in an act of desperation, pushes him down the stairs to get him off of her and the child, where he actually dies. Thomas died from a domestic violence dispute. I hate to call it domestic violence. It always seems worse. Where there's this intimate partner of violence and threat. So we're getting that flashback, and Ava and Gary are in this scene because they're still in that doctor's room where Dr. Brooks is taking up these memories in the brain waves. All right. But they have to keep Ava away from him because it'll disrupt what's happening. Even Uncle Gary tries to keep her from jumping on her father. He wakes up though, and when he wakes up, Nolan wakes up because it's still in Nolan's body. He sees Ava. She runs over to him, and he actually initiates the handshake that she's been trying to initiate the whole movie. And it says that, he's coming back. Dr. Brooks conclude, something's gone wrong. Something's gone wrong because she can't bring her son Thomas back through the body of Nolan. Okay? And Gary, pushes her back and says, look, you took an oath, basically the Hippocratic oath. Nolan knocks over his medical tray and leaves. Like, he gets the fuck out of there. Dr. Brooks was trying to bring her son, Thomas Brooks, back. So at the end, his daughter Ava, Nolan's daughter Ava, who is really his daughter, runs into his bedroom happy and he tries to braid her hair. Like I said, it's a tender moment. Dr. Brooks is dismissed and fired from her job. Miranda sees the headline in the paper that she's been fired and kind of smiles, but they decide to move. Her and her daughter decide to move, and I guess for a new path and that kind of thing. Then they show Dr. Brooks in the last scene at her computer again, despite being fired. And she has backup files on Thomas Brooks, her son, at home. And she's able to download her son's brain waves onto this machine she has at home and is able to look through his eyes and his brain apparently. And it just seems like, and then that's where the movie stops. And what it seems like it says she never got over the loss of her son, but she wanted to give him a second chance at life, despite his abuse, despite the trauma inflicted on his wife and child. And she used another black man's body to do it. We can open this up for a conversation of organ um, trafficking, um, which happens with black men. Also, looking at black people as doctors and medical ethics. And it was just a real good Afrofuturistic movie. And, I really encourage people to go and watch it. It was actually less than 2 hours. I don't know why I said that. But Black Box is an Amazon Prime original from 2020. So if you have Amazon Prime, it's, within your subscription. I won't say it's free because you already pay for it. But yeah, take a look at it. Let me know down in the comments. I definitely think it's worth a watch. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.